Today I'm going to speak on the theme of love and share a bit about how I learned to see the world through the camera and a lens of love. The camera creates art. It turns the simple and mundane into the breathtakingly beautiful, right? There we go. The camera invites us to be storytellers. We pick up the camera, look through the viewfinder, and we create a visual story, image by image, of our lives, of what draws us in, of what we find beautiful, of what we find intriguing. Who here, whether it's a cell phone, a point and shoot, or a DSLR, engages in that energy of noticing the world around you? I hope to see most hands, because it's 2016. And whether you take self-portraits or any kind of photos you take, we are creating a visual story on that camera roll of ours. And now you might not think that this kind of storytelling through the camera is a love story, or that it has anything to do with love at all. And that's where I'm here to share my story with you today, because I didn't have any idea that love plus photography could equal anything in particular, especially something incredibly powerful. I actually thought the opposite. I thought that the camera was the enemy to learning to love myself, that it didn't have any place in photography. And we're not really taught that it could be a place of self-compassion. Most of us have probably actually heard, even grew up with people seeing photos of themselves and responding with critique, or maybe we do that ourselves. Plus, there's this growing selfie culture, and alongside it, the idea that selfies are something that makes us vain or narcissistic. And then there's the artistic type of self-portrait, where sometimes it seems as though self-portraits are acceptable if they are based on using ourselves as a model, if we take the personal out of the art, if we become someone other than ourselves. That's probably what most of us kind of has as a sense of selfies and self-portraits, right? That they're either something vain or that we should take the personal out of it. And that's what I thought. I realized that I was wrong. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It meant that I was wrong. And that what awaited me through the camera was something deeply healing. And if you'll join me, I'd love to take you way back 10 years ago, before we even knew a word such as selfie. Can you flash yourself back there with me? Because that's where this begins. I wanted to invite you back pre-selfie, because it's where a turning point happened for me. A turning point in a way that led me to be able to stand here talking to you. I could have ended up here, but I would have been talking about a very different subject had I taken a different path. And we all have these turning points, right? Where we choose one path over another. Maybe one path is what we've always known, what feels comfortable and safe. And then there's that unknown path, what scares us and what we feel a pull towards still. Sometimes, whether it's in our creative life or life as a whole, we choose safety. Other times, we step into the unknown. And this story has me turning towards that unknown path and the work and the wonder and love that unexpectedly evolved from it. So I'm going to share a bit of my story with you of how this all began and how I came to use the camera for a tool for self-compassion. First, in order to help heal my negative body image and low self-esteem at the time, but then how it became to be the work and the way that I get to help other people in the world and the way I feel most of service. So this happened 10 years ago, and it was pre-selfies, just at the beginning of it. I was in my late 20s and had absolutely zero interest in photography before this. I'd actually been searching endlessly for my creative path. Is anyone kind of in the search? Yeah, lots of us are probably in the search in some way. Some of us might have found that one thing. I'd tried every other medium, songwriting, singing, theater, searching for that feeling of coming home to a creative path. And photography wasn't on my radar. I thought it was intimidating. I thought you needed to know everything about aperture and shutter speed before even beginning. Is there any creative medium, or maybe do you guys feel that way about photography and the big fancy DSLRs that, no, I'm glad you don't feel that way. Awesome. Well, thankfully, the evolution of digital photography helped me get over that, because I got a cell phone. And I know this may be not a typical photographer's talk, because we're supposed to be gear, gear, gear. But the truth is that a little flip phone with the tiniest camera, I think the photos were really like literally this big, they were minuscule. But to quote Chase Jarvis, the best camera is the one you have with you. And that's what happened for me. This simple cell phone quickly gave way to me getting a point and shoot, and then within a year, I had got a DSLR. But I realized that it wasn't the camera that was the magic, that was taking the pictures. It was the act of taking the photo, whichever camera I ended up using. And I also learned that the things that I found intimidating were actually deeply inspiring if I met them with creative playfulness and curiosity. All of us who have a creative medium that we love know that it's actually the feeling of, oh my gosh, I could do this every day for the rest of my life and learn something every single day. That is what keeps us and draws us in, right? It's not needing to master or have nothing left to learn about a subject. The creative magic is the endless potential and discovery for learning. So I was at a crossroads, right? Let's go back there. And what happened, if I'm going to get vulnerable, they tell you to get vulnerable in Creative Mornings as a speaker, and it came at a time when I hit a rough patch, also described as a depression. The way I'd been living and feeling about myself, I'd hit a wall, and way more self-care and self-compassion were needed. The best way I can describe this time is that I was deeply lonely, but not from anyone else. I was lonely from myself, in a way that couldn't be solved by anyone else either. I had to learn to refill my own well and befriend myself. So with this camera, whichever it was at the time, I started going out on photo walks, and it became a daily practice for me. And each time I went out with my camera, whether it was in my yard or an hour-long walk at, say, Van Dusen Gardens, I came home with photos that made me smile, and my heart just felt a little bit lighter. And what had got me to this point where I was hitting this wall and I had to make a choice of where my life was going, it actually goes back further to my teens. You know that time when we're starting to define ourselves, where we're neck deep in discovery and trying to figure out who we are and where we fit in the world? Sometimes that very much continues the rest of our lives too, though. Let's be honest. And it was around this time that I started to believe some of the messages that I was receiving around me. Many of us in our early teens got bombarded with expectations of who or what we should be, whether it's from family or complete strangers, or it may be the sexism, racism, and fat phobia that exists in our culture. So many of the things we come to believe about ourselves aren't true, and we may need to unlearn these things throughout the rest of our lives. And I believe these messages that I was experiencing and hearing. And some of these words, unlovable, unworthy, unbeautiful, repulsive, disgusting, were how I felt about myself. And I know it's harsh, but it feels important to speak these things aloud, because too many of us are walking around thinking it's okay to speak to ourselves in this way. We know it's not okay to say that to someone else, but we still use it against ourselves. We hear these kind of words through our inner critic. And we may hear sometimes things from the outside world too. And I believed them from the age 12 to 28, until that simple cell phone landed in my hand, and that's where life took a turn. I had been living in a state of self-hate. Up to this point, the camera had actually been my enemy, my nemesis, and very much a part of the problem. Photos had felt like proof of the old stories of how I saw myself. I focused in on the negative in every single photo, as though I had tunnel vision on certain parts of my body or just myself as a whole. Does anyone else struggle with seeing themselves in photos? Yeah. So that's where I was, and that's where I try to help people find a place of self-compassion. So that's how I felt about every single photo, until that moment, that turning point when, fresh out of a depression, with no clue who I was anymore, I stood there, camera in hand, starting to take those first few photos. And I made a choice. I had to choose self-critique or self-compassion. I could listen to those old stories of how I saw myself, or I could just listen in for a new one. So that's what I did. I just started listening through the camera in a way. I didn't actually even start by taking self-portraits. I just started looking for the beauty around me, whether it was something typically beautiful or not. Peeling paint, maybe, you know how the puddles with the sky reflected in it, water droplets. This was all happening in Vancouver in the winter, as you can tell by my examples. But I was finding this unexpected beauty, and slowly, photo by photo, it just started feeling like I was filling up that well again, drop by drop. I wasn't trying to solve my self-esteem or body image. I was just trying to feel seen in my own life, to really see the world around me and the beauty awaiting me. And that's what happened through the camera. And I started inviting myself into those photos. Sometimes my hands holding a flower, like in these photos, or my feet. Because, let's pause and say that selfies are not just an arm's length photo like we think of them now. They can be your reflection, your shadow, parts of yourselves, your hands and your feet. It's really you get to tell the story your way through the camera. I also learned to use my timer and got my whole body in the photo, which is another way of taking a selfie. And like those photos of the peeling paint or the puddles, I started seeing beauty as a whole in a new way and realized if I could see beauty in the unexpected around me, then maybe I could aim that same lens at myself. Maybe it was possible to see something beautiful in myself and unlearn those words that were up there earlier. And that beauty didn't need to fit into a stereotype either. To quote Salma Hayek, because this is I live by this quote, people often say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And I say that the most liberating thing about beauty is realizing that you are the beholder. This empowers us to find beauty in places where others may have not dared to look, including inside ourselves. Was my nemesis still awaiting me in the camera? Feels like what it was like. Yes, she was. But so was another voice, one that was curious, one that would ask questions like, what would happen if I just took a deep breath, or kind of shook out the tension before I took a photo? What if I pretended the camera wasn't even there? What would I do? How would I move? And it was there that I heard my own voice again, for the first time since before those clouds of insecurity and self-hate had emerged at age 12. I heard this voice of possibility, of potential, and even love, a voice that just started to balance out that inner critic, even if at first it was just a whisper. And for the first time, I felt like I was in control. And that's the powerful thing about being a self-portrait photographer or taking self-portraits. We're in control of the camera. We are the subject, we are the art director, we are the editor, we write the script. We create our own vision of the world around us and of ourselves. And I became the narrator of my own story, separate from my inner critic, and realized I could choose to live in a place of self-critique, or I could choose self-compassion. It's not that we flip a switch and suddenly we have no inner critic and we only see with love. Not in the least. It's something we get to choose again and again and again. And the photo felt like the tool to help me do that. Choosing a new voice, choosing love over hate, photo by photo. And were there photos I didn't love? Absolutely. But what happened is that the bad photos start to lose their charge. The more I've learned to stand in my own personal power around the camera and my self-image, the more I have a place to return to when those waves of self-critique return. I also realized self-love wasn't exactly what I imagined it would be. And let me explain that. I think we get confused about self-love, especially these days. I really got thinking about this a few years ago when I had the great honor of volunteering for an event called G-Day for Girls. Locally, has anyone heard of it? Amazing. It helps young girls and supports them through as they enter adolescence. It's a celebration of them. And throughout the day, they were kind of asked what they love about themselves. And they're like, I love my freckles, I love my brain, I love my hair. They were with that enthusiasm. That age group is amazing. And yet, after that day, I just kept on thinking of selfies and the way, even a few years after that kind of age they're at, when they use the camera to keep exploring this same self-love that we've encouraged them to have and embody, they're told that that's vain and narcissistic, especially through the camera. We're supposed to believe in ourselves, but not too much, right? We're supposed to meet a certain standard of beauty, but not put too much energy into it. And we're supposed to love ourselves, but quietly. And sometimes we need to shout it out. Sometimes we need to counteract the self-critique and make our self-love visible. I am seeing so much of this in the selfie culture these days. And I did that too, shared these exciting revelations about countering my self-critique. But there was something actually awaiting me beyond that too. For me, this idea of self-love was something I needed to achieve, a finish line I needed to cross someday, and that I would get past it and never have an inner critic thought again. I think we kind of attach perfectionism to self-love sometimes. And honestly, it's only been in the past few years where I realized where all this selfie taking was leading me. And it was a surprising place. It wasn't about vanity. It wasn't even all that much about me. And the best word I can describe it is as neutrality. And by neutrality, I mean that I stopped being in a battle between love and hate. I stopped seeing my body in photos and in the mirror, and when I looked down at it as something good or bad, just something inherently worthy, like your body, like your body, like your body. My belly got to stop being something that was bad or that I critiqued. It just got to be my belly. My upper arms, that was what I focused tunnel vision in photos or compare it to the person beside me. They just get to be my arms now. Do you know what I mean then? By neutrality, just like taking the charge away from it. And we also know that we can't control how other people see that photo. That's kind of the vulnerability of photos too. We only get to define how we react to it, where we place our value. And we can place it in our own hands or someone else's. And this goes beyond the camera. I do this work with the camera and with folks, but it really goes beyond the photo into our lives as a whole. This place of neutrality, it feels more peaceful. Those of us caught up in self-critique, whether it's about body image or perfectionism, perhaps, we know it can be all-consuming. It can take over our day. It can take a great day and take it down. And it was powerful to realize that all this work through the camera was getting me to this place where I didn't feel so charged anymore. And I got energy to put to other uses, like helping other people do this. And this won't apply to everyone, but this is kind of what happened for me, is that I always thought I needed to change my body to love myself. And it turns out I just had to change how I saw myself. So let's come back to this year, 2016, where there is such thing as a selfie, and they are being taken more than ever. We probably all have cameras in our pockets or bags right now. And selfies are a place we can see our physicality, but they're also a place we get to see our story unfold, where we get to narrate our own story, every single one of you. And that's what I see in present-day selfie culture. People becoming the narrator of their own story. Sometimes, yes, I'll say this aloud, that we tell a story we think we're supposed to tell, maybe a certain kind of Kardashian selfie. That's one, but only one type of selfie. What I see beyond that, if we look beyond that, is a generation of youth who are telling their story. I see youth who see a visual media that doesn't include them. Their skin color, their gender identity, their sexuality, their body type, many things that make them unique. That's not in the magazines. They're trying, but it's not. We get to reclaim space for ourselves. And that's what I see in youth culture with selfies these days. I find that with selfies, it's so easy to focus on this pop culture kind of selfie. And when we do, we really miss out on the amazing, empowering folks out there who are rewriting visual culture, sharing their selfies, their truths. And you know what happens when we see more of a reflection of ourselves out there in images? It brings about more self-love. So in my work with adults, I see so many people who have actively been avoiding the camera for years. Camera comes out, they're gone. Sometimes even a decade. I had one participant who hadn't been in any photos in a decade of her life. And we don't all have to be taking photos all the time. I'm a big fan of putting the camera down and connecting with the people around you. But when we hide from the camera, when we actively avoid it, that's another way we're narrating a story, and it's a story in which we're absent. And the camera doesn't have to be everyone's tool for self-compassion, but we so commonly don't see it as a tool for learning to love ourselves. And through my experience and through the voices of the folks I get to work with, I believe more than ever that the camera can be a tool for way more than just creating a wonderful, amazing image. It can be a tool for love. That's where I try to bring a bit of a new voice to selfie culture and photography as a whole, alongside other amazing folks who are creating this new visual culture of ours, image by image. And so this became my work. It started as a personal project, just me going out on these photo walks, and it slowly became my full-time work. What's really neat is alongside this evolution of selfies, there's been the most amazing evolution of technology that I bet has a lot of us in this room able to do the kind of work we do, especially online. Whether it's you're a creative entrepreneur, you create something for creative entrepreneurs. Anyone? I bet there's a bunch. You can tell me later. These activities I was just simply using to help heal myself became the curriculum I provide others to do this work, to be the narrator of their own story, to redefine who they see themselves. My work is called Be Your Own Beloved, and it's online and in-person workshops, and I help people learn to treat themselves with the same reverence that we would want to be treated by a beloved family member or friend, right? Or we would want to treat a beloved family member or friend. And I get to work with folks around the world. I send activities and curriculum their way, and each of us with our camera in our hands get to step into our image in our own world, in our own life, and find that voice of self-compassion. And then we gather together in community for support and encouragement. The camera is a place where we get to tell our stories, where we get to see ourselves reflected back at us, where we get to create our own definition of beauty and include ourselves in that, where we get to rewrite the stories we have about our body, our worthiness, our identity, and we get to see those photos we might call outtakes, the ones that bring up those old stories of how we feel about our body, and we get to take our power back from them. The more we see these photos of ourselves, the outtakes, the more they become something that doesn't hold power over us. We get to see that in any moment, there could be 1,000 different ways we could see ourselves through the camera. We are not just one perspective, we're not just one story, but we get to choose the story that is told. And we can choose a story of love. Thanks. Okay.
Okay, so let's ask some questions now. So Vivienne, thank you so much for that. That was wonderful.
Thanks.
The self-portrait, when we look at ourselves, you know, we see ourselves only in that manner that we see in the mirror or a photograph of ourselves, but it's not the way everyone else sees us. It's the equivalent of when you first hear your voice on an answering machine. It's like, who is that? I have no idea who that voice belongs to. So that reconciliation of knowing that other people see or hear us another way, how did you reconcile that with the self-portrait?
That's a great question. I think it's a matter of just getting comfortable with ourselves. In a way, like the people around us are probably seeing us through a lens of self-compassion, or compassion too. I don't think we look at each other and like critique. I try not to, and if you do, maybe that's something to work on. But I think we generally like look at one another with compassion and think what's awesome about one another. So in a way, I think it is about that conversation with ourselves and how do I see you the way other people see you? A great tool can just be to ask to get support around you. How do your friends and family see you? Maybe they'll help kind of put some perspective on how you see yourself. And in the classes I teach, we do have I comment on every photo and give them support. And sometimes I think the way other people see us can help us see ourselves. So somebody saying, this is what I love about this photo can, oh, okay. So bringing in other people's voices as well as just making it a place for conversation with ourselves. And yeah, and getting comfortable. It's like the answering machine. It's uncomfortable at first, and that's okay. Yeah.
I like that engagement of conversation to find more about yourself through others.
Totally.
So, speaking of conversations with others, who else has a question for our dear friend Vivienne? Come on, I got some good questions here. Okay.
Yeah, so we were wondering how you sort of navigate the discourse between a selfie being an act of narcissism versus an act of self-love.
Well, I kind of don't believe that it's an act of narcissism. I feel like even if it looks like the photo is an act of narcissism to someone else, there's still some self-discovery, or there's the potential for self-discovery in it. I struggle with the narcissism, because that's an actual condition. And some people may have narcissistic personality disorder, but I think we've taken this word and made it like a critique of ourselves, and I don't think it's literally narcissistic. And maybe vain is another word that kind of gets often used there, but I think sometimes, especially, like I hadn't seen myself as beautiful in any way until like 30. So sometimes we may dabble into that, like outfit of the day photos, selfies are amazing. Like sometimes what might be vain to somebody else, exploring makeup and how it helps you see your face differently if you're a woman, or if you're a man who wears makeup. Totally. It is, yeah, we get to define what vanity is to us. I think vanity can be a good thing for some people. It can be a way that you find self-compassion. So I struggle with the narcissism part, but yeah.
Great question and a great answer.
Yeah.
It's almost like layers of self-love to a point
Yeah.
where it becomes problematic. Anyone else with a question? Of course, right smack dab in the middle. All right, Bear.
I would love to hear an example of
Sure.
how you've actually put this in practice with individuals. I felt like the talk had so much beautiful value.
Thanks.
And in the end, I was like, I want to know more.
I know there's
And that's
20
what we
minutes.
all are wanting to learn more. And maybe you could just give
Sure.
an example of how maybe in one person's life it's
Totally. I'd wanted to bring in voices of the participants, and yeah, 20 minutes goes by real fast. I could do a 20-minute talk about their stories with their permission. Yeah, one that just happened, I got an email from a participant where I teach a month-long class, and she had been avoiding the camera for a long time, and she just emailed me, and we're on day 8 of class, so 30-day class, and she had been avoiding cameras for a very long time, and she is feeling this kind of awakening of herself. I think it sometimes comes through creativity first, so it's the way that we can play with the camera and creatively take the self-portrait, and then once we kind of feel more comfortable with the camera and our creative expression, we get to really dig in and see ourselves. That's a participant's experience, like an example of one of the activities that I do that could give you a sense of kind of how this works. I have a year-long program too, and an activity I gave them the other day was to listen in. I think we take selfies, and you take a bunch, maybe 10, 20. If you're working with me, you'll take lots more. And you find that one that you really like, right? We get in that practice of like only finding the good one. And I ask them to listen in and see what else beyond what we want the photo to look like is awaiting us. So the example, I took a bunch of selfies one day, and I wanted this like energetic, happy, fabulous photo, and that's not what I was getting. So I listened in, and it's like, what do you really want to tell me? There's somebody awaiting me in these photos. There's a part of myself that I'm not listening to by trying to force a certain type of photo. And so it was a place of listening. So I would love to talk more on one-on-one if I can, yeah, if you have any questions about kind of the activities, stuff like that. Thank you.
Awesome. There's a very unofficial component of Creative Mornings Vancouver where the speaker is always inundated with people afterwards that keep
That's
them
okay.
here much longer.
I'm prepared for that.
Yeah, you're being voluntold into that opportunity.
And selfies are welcome, if you want to.
One more, we try to get everyone out around 10 a.m., so we're getting close to that time, if not just slightly past. So I'll take one more question at this time, right in the very back. Curtis, can you project?
When's your next CamTech workshop?
Thanks, Curtis from CamTech. You got some things about HTML on your seats. I also teach for CamTech locally. They're really close. The workshops are to the Hive, and August 6th at 1 to 4. I teach a smartphone photography workshop there. So it's not particularly self-portraits, but no pressure. And I also teach online, so you can, yeah.
Is there one more question that's not a plug?
Oh.
Craig?
So I really enjoyed your talk, and one of the things I
you.
noticed for myself, I take lots of photos, but I'm not in any of them.
Yeah.
Which brings up the question, like, the whole conversation seems to be about women. What about men?
Totally.
Are
Glad
they
you asked.
taking your courses?
Yeah.
How many? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, it's true. A lot of the classes are cisgendered women, but this session I have a fellow in it who actually works in body image himself. So I really hope that there's more and more men and folks who don't identify with gender, just people who come in the classes. I really make sure to use ungendered terms so everyone feels welcome in the class posts. And this, speaking of my own experience, is definitely a more feminine story, but I really want everyone. I don't think selfies and healing from selfie or healing our self-worth is just for women or about women. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Vivienne. Thank you so much.
Thanks.